Alright, so now let's take a look at the application that we're making. So this is a notes application which is going to enable us to create notes. For example, if I just decide that I'm going to create some notes, just some random text, for example, go do this task, and if I just hit enter or I click on this add button, this task is going to be added. And if I just decide no, it's going to be of blue color, then I just say that go to this place again. Alright, and if I just click on add, it's going to be added in blue color. Now if I just click on pink and I just say do this work and I click on add, alright, so each and everything is going to be added. Alright, so this was a purple color, and I could search for these text. For example, I could just search for go to. So if that particular node is not going to exist inside of our state, then it's going to say to us that this node doesn't exist. But if it does, it's going to give us that particular node. Now in this particular application, you'll be learning about Redux toolkit, how to use that, how to use React-Redux inside of application, and how to store data in the state. So without wasting any time, let's get started. So now we'll be starting off with our React application, and thanks to Facebook's Create React App utility, it's fairly simple to do so. All you need to do is that you need to run these 3 commands and your app is up and ready to go. The CI utility does save us a lot of work. It comes with Babel and React DOM pre-installed into our application, so it does save us a lot of time. Now before we start creating a React application, there are certain prerequisites, and that is you need to have Node installed on your systems, which I'm going to presume that you already have. But if you just don't, then download it from the official website, the long-term support version. And to find out which version of Node you're on, just open up a command prompt or Windows or terminal and run the command node with -v, and they should tell you your Node version. I am on version 16.13.1. Download it from the official website, and it's fairly simple to do so. You can just download it from here. Therefore, I'm not going to show you how to download and install Node.js. Now, apart from Node, we'll also be needing code editor. I'm going to use VS Studio Code for the purpose of this project. Feel free to use any other code editor, but I'm going to recommend you that you should use VS Code because it comes with a lot of features that might help you during a development process. But if you have some personal preference like Atom or maybe Sublime, then just feel free to use them. At the end of the day, we just need a code editor. Now to create a React application, open up a command prompt, which you already have over here, or Windows terminal. Alright, now I'll be creating a React application. To create a React application, you need to run these 3 commands, and those are namely npx create react app, followed by the name of your app, and then you have to move into your app directory and start your server. Now let's open up a terminal, and we'll be creating a React app, and the name of our app is going to be Notes-Redux. So npx create react app. So npx create, and the name of our app is Notes-Redux, Notes-Redux. Now this is going to take some amount of time, and once it's done, we'll be moving back into our application. So alright, now we have successfully created our React application. Now we need to move into our app directory, that is Notes-Redux, and then launch a server. Now to move into our app directory, we just have to run change directories and the name of our application, that is Notes-Redux. Alright, now we are inside of our Notes-Redux. Now what you're going to do is that we'll be launching up a VS Code instance of our application, and to do that you just have to run code with a period. Know that it is only going to run if you have Visual Studio Code installed on the systems, but if you don't, then if you're having Atom other than Visual Studio Code, then you need to run Atom with a period. But since I'm having Visual Studio Code, run code with a period. So alright, now we are inside of our VS Code instance of our application, that is our Notes-Redux. Now inside this we are having these node modules. Apart from node modules, we are having certain other folders like the public folder and the source directory. And apart from them, we are having this gitignore, package.json and package.log.json. So now what these folders are. So when talking about node modules, this is going to contain all the packages that we are going to install into our systems. As you might see that there are certain packages with the name Babel and all. So what these packages are, if I just move into my package.json file, you might see that there are modules or packages such as React, React DOM, and React scripts. So all these all these are node packages. Now apart from these node packages, we are having this public folder. Inside this we are having this favicon.ico and index.html and logo png and certain other files. And our main area of interest lies in our source directory. So now before we actually touch any of these files, let's give it our first run. So open up your inbuilt terminal, and to do that you just have to move into this terminal and click on create new terminal, or alternatively you can press this shortcut as you might see on the screens. Now apart from this, so let's just first give our application our first run. So for that purpose, just move into your terminal and just run the command npm start. So now we see our application is up and running on localhost 3000, and a browser with this URL must have loaded on your browser. So if I just move into my browser, so this is what the CRE utility gives us, spinning React logo with two text that says that to make any changes you have to edit in the app.js file. So just move into your app directory, and the first thing that we're going to do is that we'll be closing this off, and inside the source directory we'll be moving into our app.js file, and we'll be changing the text inside here. So just move into this and remove this entire header segment over here, and instead we'll be having an h1 tag. So let's create an h1 tag, and inside this h1 tag we'll be having our all right, so let's make it working. So working. All right, now hit save, and let's take a look into our application. So now we can see that our text has been replaced. Now we are having this working instead of the spinning React logo and all that other stuff. So now we have made changes into our application. Now if I just move back, and inside the source directory we are having this app.css file. We are having this app.js file, as well as app.test.js and index.css. And these extensions are more than self-explanatory what they do. They're having CSS, and all that CSS that you saw before was applied through these files. There are quite a many ways to apply CSS into our application. We can use the CSS framework. We can write our own CSS. We can use Sass, or we can use the inline styling. There are many ways to write CSS into a React application. And we are having this logo.svg and certain other files. So now let's first get rid of the files that we do not need. We do not need this app.test.js, so let's get rid of this. As well as this logo.svg. All right, so now let's take a look into our public folder. So inside this public folder, we are having this index.html. Now inside this index.html, when you're going to move in here, you'll be seeing certain meta tags and a bunch of link tags. All right, so if I just move down, here you might see this is the title of the application is React app. And if I just move back into my browser, then you might see that this is the React app. So let's change the title to notes. So if I just move back into my application, and we'll be changing the title to notes. So let's make it notes. All right, so this is our notes now. Okay, if I just move back into my application directory, then you might see that there's an error that says that module not found can't resolve logo.svg, and that's totally fair, because if I just move back into my application and into my app.js file, then you might see that I am trying to import this logo.svg, but we have deleted it. So how is the compiler supposed to find it? So let's just remove these two as well. We'll be removing our logo as well as our app.css. So get rid of them and hit save. Now if I just move back into my application directory, so yeah, you might see that the CSS that was applied via app.css file has been removed now, and we can see our application. Now this is all about our application. Now there are certain extensions that I like you to have, and that might come in handy when you're developing a React application, not only this project but when you're working with any other projects, and those are namely the auto close tag. So to download these extensions or to install them inside of your VS Code, you might see that I already have them. Just go into the marketplace and search for these extensions, and these extensions are namely auto close tag. So what this does is that it makes sure that whenever you create a tag, it has a closing tag. For example, if I just make sure that I have a paragraph tag over here and I close this, so you might see that there's an closing tag of paragraph element that has automatically generated for us. So this is what the auto close tag does for us. Now it says that reload required, so we're going to make sure that it reloads. Apart from this auto close tag, you'll also be needing this auto rename tag. So as the name suggests, what it does, whenever, suppose if you are working on one particular application. So now what this auto rename tag does is that, for suppose you're working in an application and for some reason you decide that no, I do not want this to be a paragraph element, I want this to be an h3. So you just make it an h3, and the closing tag or the corresponding closing tag is also going to be turned to h3. So this is what the auto rename tag does. Now apart from this auto rename tag, you'll also be needing this bracket pair colorizer, as well as these ES7 Redux React Redux lints. So this is all about our application. So now we'll be starting with our application. So now let's create all the components that we need inside of our application. And for that purpose, we'll be moving inside of our source directory and creating up a folder with the name components. And after that, we'll be creating the components that we need inside of our application. So for the first step is to create a folder. All right, there's a trick that you can use when creating folders, and inside that you need to create certain components. So for that purpose, you just have to create a new file and just name the file. What do you want? So for example, I want the name of my folder to be components. So let's name it components, and then a backslash, and after that you have to name the file inside it. For example, inside this I want a file with the name header. So inside this I'm going to name the file with the name header and an extension. So header.jsx. All right. Now you can see I'm having this folder, and inside this folder components, I'm having this file known as header. Now apart from this header, we'll be having two other files at the moment, and those are namely the note input as well as the content. So let's create those two other files, and those are note input.jsx, and the other file name is the content. So apart from note input, we'll be having another file with the name content. So content.jsx. So alright, we are now having these three inputs, or these three components. Now before we move any further, let's populate these contents. These are going to be functional components, so let's make them for functional components. And if you have installed those particular code snippets, then by running RFCE, you might be able to create React functional components. So all you have to do is that just run RFCE. So you have to just write, this is the header, this is the header. Alright, now let's save this and copy this entire portion and move into our note input. Inside this we'll save it again, but instead we'll be having now note input. So just select this and select all the headers, and this is going to be equal to note input. Now if you're wondering how am I doing this, then this is what we call to as multi-cursor editing. And in order to do multi-cursor editing, you just have to select the text and then press Ctrl+D, and it's going to select all those texts with the same name. For example, this is note input. I'm going to select this, and then I'm going to press Ctrl+D and D to the point of time that I'm able to select all the text that I need to, and after that I can edit them. And now to leave this multi-cursor editing mode, you just have to press escape, and it's gone now. All right, now let's again copy this entire stuff and save this for now, and copy this and move into our content. And inside this again we're going to paste it, but this time we'll be having content over here rather than having input. So let's select it, content. All right, so this is a text. It's supposed to be note input, not input. So let's amend this. All right, now we are good. Now let's save this and close off all these files and move into our app.jsx. So inside this app.js, we'll be calling all these components. So we'll be calling first our header, then our note input, and then our content. So let's import them from our components folder. So we'll be importing our content, but first our header. It doesn't really matter which order you actually import them from, but just for the sake of my own sanity, I'm doing it like this. From our components, all right, so we are inside this directory only. So from header, from our components, we'll be calling in our header.jsx. All right. Now after this header, we'll also be importing our other components that are our note input as well as our header. So note input So let's import our node input, and this is coming from our components again. And from our components, the name of the file is node input.jsx. All right, now after this node input, we'll be also importing our other file, that is content. So let's import our content. And inside of this content, where this is coming from our components again, and inside the components, content. All right, now we are all good. Now let's get rid of this entire div segment, and we'll be removing this entire div, or perhaps just the entire h1 and h3. And instead of this class name, we'll be having another class name, and that is going to be container. So let's give this a class name of container. All right, now inside this container, we are going to call in our header and our node input and our content. So let's call in our header. This is going to be self-closing, and our node input. And our content. All right, so now we are all good. Now if I just close this and take a look into our application. So if I just move into my application. So all right, now you might see that this is the header, this is the node input, and this is the content. So we are able to structure our components now. Now this is a React course, and I really wonder whether we should be talking about CSS or not, but I feel like as a CSS is a prerequisite for this course, and the properties that we'll be using inside the CSS are pretty much self-explanatory. So I want you to move into app.css file and get rid of all the CSS properties and paste all the CSS properties that has been provided to you along with this file or this course. You might move into app.css and copy the entire CSS that's in here and just come here and paste it. Now this is all the CSS that we'll be needing inside of our application. So just paste it. And if I just move back into my app now, but after pasting the CSS, let's import our CSS file as well inside of our app.js, which we removed earlier. So we'll be importing our app.css. All right, so now we are all good. And if I just take a look into my terminal, so yeah, we have okay, let's save it first. So all right, if I just move back into my app, so you might see that these three components have been centered, and obviously there are more properties that are going to be applied once we start creating our application and start digging into them. But before that, this is all what we get. Okay, so let's just move back into our application. And inside this, what we are going to do is that we'll be creating at first a header, and then our node input, and then our contact. But before that, there are certain libraries that we are using inside of our application. So I want you to create another terminal or open up a new terminal, and we'll be installing those particular packages inside of our application. And they are namely React-Redux, Redux Toolkit, as well as Nanoid. So now let's start creating our components, and along the way as we move forward, there are certain other components that we'll be creating. So the first component that we are going to initialize with is the header component. So I need you to move into your header.jsx and close off all the other components that are on your screen. And inside this, we're going to create a div. So let's create a div, as we already have one. But this div, all right, so let's create a div with the class name header text. So we're going to create a div, and the class name that you're going to give this is going to be header text. So give this div a class name of equals to header text. And remember, we have already applied the CSS to our application. That means we are already having CSS applied to this particular class name inside of our app.css. So we are no longer requirement to add CSS to this particular div. All right, so now let's close this, and this is our notes app. So this is our notes application. All right, now inside this div, what we're going to do is that we'll be calling up All right, so this is the div. Now we need to create a parent div as well. So let's create a parent div. This is going to hold this div, and inside, let me just bring it inside of this. All right, so this is the parent div. Now, as you might recall, inside of our header, we had a search bar. So now we are going to create a search bar component, and we'll be configuring it. So inside of your components, let's create a search bar.jsx. So let's create a search bar .jsx. All right, so this is our search component. Now let's call this before we initialize this. So inside the header, let's first import our search bar that lies in the same directory, that's components. So let's import our search bar. All right, now we are having a search component being imported. Now we need to initialize it just beneath our div. All right, so let's initialize it just beneath our div, that is search. All right, self-closing, and now we are all good. Now inside this search, let's move inside of our search .jsx, and inside this, let's configure our search bar. So this too is going to be a functional component, so we can just run rfce to get a boilerplate of this code. So here we are having our functional component, and that's rfce. All right, so now inside this, we will be having a div, as we are already having one. So we are importing that from React. All right. So why am I getting this error? All right, it must go with time. Okay, so now inside this, we're going to have a div. Okay, so we are already having one. And inside this div, what we're going to have is an input field. So right inside this div, let's create an input field. And this input field is going to be self-closing. All right. Now inside this input field, we are going to have certain properties, and this is going to be of type that's equal to text. So this is going to be of type text. All right, now after this type, we'll be providing with certain other values such as value and placeholder and class name. So give this a class name, and this class name is going to be equal to search box. So give this a class name that is search-box. Search-box. All right. So now we'll be adding other properties like value as well as on-change properties to it. But before we do that, we'll need to configure our React-Redux. So I'll be just leaving it for now, but we'll be coming back later to fix that. Now let's just hit save. So now what this must have done inside of our code is that it must be having a beautiful looking search bar icon. So let's see whether our code is compiled or not. So if I just move into my application or the terminal, all right, so we have compiled it successfully, and we are importing it inside of our header. As well as the header is being imported inside of our app.js. All right, so it seems all good. Now let's just move into our application to see that how it's working. All right, so we see our application has lined up. Now we can see a search bar which is not visible at the moment, but it is going to be. So we can type anything in it, but all right, so this is all about our app at the moment. Now let's head back into our application, and inside this, what we're going to do is that we'll be creating a next component, and that is our notes input component. So head to your notes input, and we'll be configuring it next. As usual, we won't be dealing with the dynamics of it. That means how we are going to add data to our store and all that. At first, we'll be creating up a skeleton of our application. So that's our main focus now. So inside this div, so let's get rid of the statement that says that this is input, and instead what we're going to have is a text area. Before we do that, let's give this div a class name as well. So this div is going to have a class name, and that's going to be equal to let's give this a class name of text area box. So text area hyphen box. All right, so this is our div. Now inside this, we are going to have a text area. So text area And this text area is going to have a class name as well, so give this a class name as well, and this is going to be equal to text area input. So text area input. All right, this is also going to have a placeholder, so let's give it a placeholder, and this placeholder is going to state that enter your note here. So enter your note here. All right, so this is fine. Let me close this. All right, so this is our text area. Now inside this, or after this, we're going to have a button element. So let's see our app as it looks now. So let me just save it. All right, so let's shrink it. Okay, so text area with the class name text area input and a placeholder, enter a note here, and let dev. Now right after this, we're going to have a button that's going to specify the color of the note that we're going to generate. So let's see a terminal. All right, so everything has compiled successfully. Now let's take a look at our application. So yeah, this is our note that says that enter your note here, and we can enter anything at the moment. It doesn't matter what we enter, but we won't be able to save it at the moment. So now before we move any further and display this content, which is going to be displayed from our store, so we are halfway there, and now we need to add Redux into our application so that we can add store. So that's what we're going to do now. Alright, so now we are done with the basic layout of our application, and we're moving on with the Redux part. But before we move into this particular part, I would highly recommend you all to actually see the concept videos of the React-Redux, which has been provided to you. Alright, so we'll be starting with it. But before we do that, there are certain packages that we would like to install inside of our application, and that are going to help us to implement the functionalities that we want. And those packages are namely Nanoid. So basically what Nanoid is, it is going to help us to assign random IDs to our application. You'll see what it is when we are going to work with it. Apart from Nanoid, we'll also be needing React-Redux. That's a binding for React as well as Redux. As you might know, that Redux is a different package that has its own applications. So we'll be installing them. So to install these packages, all you have to do is that you'll have to run the following command: npm I React-Redux. So after npm install React-Redux, what you're going to do is that we'll be also installing some other IDs, that is nano ID. So nano. So this is the next package that we are using inside of our application, that is nano ID. Apart from this, we are also using Redux toolkit. So to install that, you have to just run at the rate Redux Redux.js / Redux toolkit. Alright, so this should install all these three packages inside of application, and it's going to take some amount of time. So let's just hit enter and close off the terminal. Now let's lay out the project structure or the folder structure of our Redux. So inside the source directory, we're going to create a folder with the name notes, and inside this we're going to have a note slice.js file. So inside the source, let's create a folder with the name store or Redux. So inside this we're going to have a folder with the name Redux, and inside this Redux folder what we're going to have is a store as well as notes. So let's create a store. So inside this Redux we are going to have a file with the name store.js. So this is going to contain the state of our entire app. So store.js, as well as we're going to have a folder with the name notes. This is going to be responsible for the actions that we're going to dispatch. We'll see about it in a minute. So let's create another folder with the name notes, and inside this notes we're going to have a file with the name notes slice.js. So let's do this. So notes, and inside this notes we're going to have a file with the name notes slice. So notes slice.js. So now let's create our notes slice.js, because this is the next component that we're figuring out on how to make this. So basically this is going to contain the reducers of our application. So as of now, you might have already installed the packages that were supposed to be installed, and those are namely our Redux toolkit. So we see our Redux.js.toolkit on version 1.7.2, as well as the Nano ID and React-Redux have already been installed into our application. So now let's just move into our node slice and start creating our node slice.js. So now this is going to we're going for, at first we're going to import our create slice from our Redux.js/toolkit. So let's import our from @Redux.js /toolkit, and we are importing the create slice function. So create slice. All right, so now what this create slice is and what it does. So basically create slice is a function that accepts an initial state, an object of reducer functions, and a slice name, and that automatically generates action creators and action types that corresponds to the reducer and state. All right, so let's just create a node slice so that you can have a better understanding how to create a slice. Okay, so let's export, create a const, and this const is going to have the name nodes slice. All right, and this is going to be equal to create slice. All right, so this is going to take up a name, so it's going to take up a name as well as an initial state, so and reducers. All right, so these are the three arguments that we're going to pass to it. So the name that we're going to assign to it is nodes, so let's give it the name nodes. And if about the initial state, then this is going to have an initial state of items that is going to be equal to nothing but an empty array. But as the time proceeds, we'll be adding our nodes inside this particular array. So for the moment, it's going to be nothing but an empty array. So just supply it with an empty array. All right, so this is our initial items, and after this we're going to provide it with search text. So it is also having our application is also having the capability to search the nodes that we have created, and initially it is going to have nothing but a value of empty string. So let's create a search text. This is going to be the query when we are searching for the nodes that we have created. So search text, and this is going to be equal to an empty. So this search text is going to have an empty string. All right, so this is all about our initial state. Now we'll be creating reducers inside of our node slice. So let's create our reducers, and one of the reducers is going to be for adding nodes. So let's name it add node. And apart from this, we'll be also having another reducer this is going to take up a state as well as payload. That means the current state of our application as well as the payload if there exists one. So this is going to be action. What type of action it is. All right, so this is our state or action. Now this is going to contain. All right, so this is our first reducer. Apart from this reducer, we are also going to have another reducer that is going to make sure that we are able to set the query strings. So this is going to be named as set search text, and this is also going to take up a state as well as action. So state as well as action, and all right, so let's provide them with certain other informations. State dot items dot push. That means, well, if you're supposed to add one node, then we'll be pushing it inside of our array. So push action dot payload. So this payload is going to contain the text that is coming. That means if someone added a text that they want to do this certain work, then that particular text is going to be contained inside of our payload. So payload. All right, so we'll be pushing up inside of our actions now. Now after this is all about our add node reducer. After this, let's move into a search text reducer, and this is going to contain state dot search text, and that is going to be equal to action dot payload, the action which is coming. So we'll be setting our search text as action dot payload. That means whatever query string has come from our UI. So this is all about our node slice. Now we'll be needing to export these two reducers as well as this particular component, that is our node slice, as a reducer. So let's export it. So export const node slice. Now after this, we'll make sure that we are exporting our add node as well as our search text. Export const, and this is going to be add node as well as add search text or set search text. All right, this is going to be equal to nodes slice dot actions. All right, now let's export this, export our node slice as a reducer. So export default node slice dot reducer. All right, so now we have created our node slice. So inside the store, let's move inside of our store.js, and inside this, things are really neat, clean, and simple. We'll be importing our configure store function. So let's import our configure store from our Redux.js toolkit. So configure store from our Redux.js toolkit, nodes reducer, and this is coming from our node slice. JS. All right, so now we are having these two files. Now let's create our reducer or create our store. So export default configure store, and inside this we're going to pass it with our reducer. So reducer, this is the key of our reducer, nodes reducer that we are supplying it with. So nodes reducer. All right, so this is our store. Now we are almost complete. The last step that remains is to provide this entire store or make this entire store available inside of our entire application. And to make that happen, we will be needing to move into our index.js, and inside this we'll be importing our provider component from our React-Redux library. As you might recall that we have installed that. So if I just move into my package.json file, so inside this you might see that we are having this React-Redux dependency that we are using inside of our application. So let's import this inside of our index.js, and we'll be wrapping or making available the entire store to our entire application. So let's just move into our index.js file. So let's first import a provider from our React-Redux library. So let's first import our provider, and this is coming from our React-Redux. All right, now we'll be importing our store. So import store, and this is coming from our store module inside of our Redux. So let's head to our Redux, and from there we'll be heading into our store file. So store, so we are importing our store from there. Now let's wrap this entire app around our provider. All right, now give it a store, and this store is coming from our store module. All right, so now it's this simple. We have provided a store component inside of our entire application tree. Now we can access the actions from our application from any other component. So now we'll be creating other components that we need inside of our application. So let's head over there. On to those particular components which we actually left off, and we'll be completing them, and note input being the first on our list, we'll be completing a note input first and later on moving to the. Now I'm going to still remind you, if you haven't watched those particular two videos which we have actually made about the concepts of using Redux, React Redux and Redux toolkits in particular, then please do watch it, because unless and until you do, you won't be actually getting the concept of what's actually happening in here. So now I'd like you to import the other two functions from the React Redux, and that are namely the use dispatch and the use selector. So import use dispatch as well as the use selector, and this is being imported from our Redux module. So let's import it from our React Redux package. All right, so now after this, what we're going to do is that we'll be calling in our add node, that was an action, as well as nano id. So let's import them as well. So let's import our add node, that was an action that was being exported from our node slice that lies inside the Redux directory and in the nodes directory. So let's import them. All right, so now we are good. Now after this, let's also import our nano id, that's going to assign IDs to our application. So nano id, this is being imported from nano id, and as you might recall that we have installed this particular package, and to verify this, just visit your package.json file, and inside this you might be able to see this nano id, which is on version 3.2.0, as well as the React Redux, that's on version 7.2.6, and Redux.js toolkit, that's on version 1.7.2. All right, so let's move into our node input again and hit save. Now let's create those particular methods that we left off. So the first thing that we're going to use is that we'll be using the use state hook. So let's import use state from our React module as well. All right, so this is a use state hook that we'll be using inside of our node input. So this text is going to be responsible to deliver the text that our users enter in its nodes. So this is the function, this is the container that's text, and a setup function to set this, that is going to be equal to set text, and initially it is going to have a value that is nothing but an empty string. So use state, and this is going to have nothing but an empty string. All right, so another use state hook that we'll be using is to define the color of the background. So const color bg color, as well as a setup function for this that is going to be named as set bg color. So const bg color and setup function such as set bg color. All right, and initially it's going to have the value of red. So give this initial value of red. All right, so now I'll be using this inside of our function, but before we do that, let's create a dispatch by using the use dispatch. So const dispatch, and this is going to be equal to use dispatch, which is coming from our React Redux library. So use dispatch, all right, now after this creating this dispatch, we're going to create an item that's going to store all the values from our store. So const items, and this is going to be equal to use selector, and this selector is going to map all the data from our state into this item. So state, all right, so now we are halfway done with this. Now what you're going to do is that we'll be creating up a function, an arrow function that is going to be responsible to pass this data, or the data that we're going to create inside of our node input, to be saved inside. So now let's move to the next part that involves creating up a functional component that is going to be responsible to add nodes inside of our application. So the next thing we're going to do is that we'll be creating a constant that is going to be responsible, or I must say a function that's going to be responsible for saving the data, so inside of our store. So let's create a const, and this const is going to be named as add new note. So let's make a const function, arrow function, I mean to say. All right, so this arrow function is going to dispatch an action. So let's dispatch. All right, we're going to dispatch an action. The action that we actually imported above, that is our add note action. So what you're going to do is that we'll be dispatching this add note with some properties and payload. So what you're going to do is that we'll be providing it with a payload. At first, let's give this an ID that's going to be equal to nano ID. All right, and after this, what we're going to do is that we'll be providing it with a payload. So that's basically the note and the text that involves this particular note. So this is the text that we're going to say. Apart from this, we are also going to provide it with the BG color. So let's give this the BG color. Now there are certain validations that I like to involve in this, and that is if users try to enter nothing but just an empty array or an empty string, then we want to alert them that no, this is not permissible. You are allowed to fill in something so that it can be added into the store. So if text triple equals to nothing but an empty string, then what do we want is that then we want to give an alert to our user that states that enter all right. Now this is the first validation. Now the next validation that we're going to involve in this particular add new note is that if user try to enter the same note that he or she has already entered, then we want to alert them that we already have this inside of our store. You do not need to add it again. Okay, so let's create a const, and this is so we'll be filtering what all inside is our store. So for that purpose, we're going to take up the items. And these items contain all the notes that are inside of our store. As you might recall that here we're using item that's getting all the data from our state. So all right, now this items dot filter, and if items, and this is going to take up single item every time from that particular store. And if it happens that the item is having the same note as the note that we are creating over in the text, that means item dot note is triple equals the text that we are having right inside of our note input. Then what we want is that then we want to store that particular data inside of this particular constant that is going to be called as a note. And if it is going to store some data, that means its length is going to be something, and obviously it's going to be greater than 0. So if it's greater than 0, that means if note is note.length is greater than 0, then what do we want is that then we want to give an alert to the user that this note exists in the store. And if this is not the case, then we want the users to proceed. Now we'll also be needing to give it return. So give this a return. Also the return should be over here also. Inside of our notes, length should be greater than 0. And after this, we're going to give this a return as well. So return. All right, so now we are all good with this. Now we need to add this new node function, and for that purpose we'll be creating a button over here. So let's create a button, and this button is going to have an on-click property as well as a class name. So first let's give this a class name that's going to be equal to button add, and the on-click that's going to be equal to add new note. All right, so now we are all good. Now the final piece of this note input is that we'll be needing to add color buttons in it so that we can define the colors of the particular text. So to do that, we'll be creating up another component inside of our components directory, and the name of this component is going to be color button. So let's create a component with the name color button .jsx. All right, so now as well, let's import this color button inside of our note input .jsx. So let's import it as well. So this lies in the same directory as components. So we'll be importing color button. This is coming from the same directory that is components, and the name is color button. All right. Now let's place this component right beneath our text area and right above our button. So color button. Alright, so this color button is going to take up two properties, that is going to be the BG color as well as set BG color. So let's give this these two properties. So set BG color, this is going to be equal to our set BG color. This is the setup function of the BG color as well as the BG color. This again is going to be equal to BG color. Alright, now the missing pieces of our text area is going to be applied to them. Now after this class name that is equal to text area.input as well as this placeholder that says that enter your note here, we are going to add it with additional properties, and that includes mainly the value. And you might have guessed this what it might be. This is nothing but the text. And after this text, we are also going to give this an onChange property. So give this an onChange, and that's going to be onChange, and this is going to take up an event. And what it is going to do is that it is going to set that particular event. So set text and e.target.value. All right, so now we are all done with this particular component, that is our note input. We have successfully created everything that is needed over here. All right, so now we are not adding one particular note here. All right, so we are not using that particular function. So import add note, we also need to add this note inside this. So let's add a note that is right inside of the dispatch. Let's add note. So this is the action that is going to be dispatched. We defined what is to be dispatched, but we didn't define what is supposed to take that parameters over there. All right. So now we are dispatching an action that says that dispatch add note, and add note is taking up the ID as well as the other payloads. All right, so now we are all done with the note input. Now let's move to other components and start configuring them, namely the color button first, and after this particular color button, we'll be moving into other component. So now we are done with our note input and we are yet to configure our color button component. So that's what you're going to do. As you can see, at this moment we are transferring it with two props, and that are namely our set BG color, that is a setup function to set the background color, as well as the current background color that exists. And at the moment the current background color is red. So let's configure our color button.jsx. So to configure this, the first step is to import React from React. So that's what we're going to do. So let's import React from React. All right, after this is going to be a functional component. So let's create a const, and the name is color button. And all right, so now it's taking up two parameters, or there are two values that are being passed to a props. We can use the values such as props like this, or we can destructure them here. So we'll choose to destructure them. And the properties that are being passed from our notes input are namely BG color and set BG color. So BG color and set BG color. All right. Oh, these are supposed to be curly braces. Okay, so now we'll be creating about array of colors. So let's create a const, and this is going to be named as color. This is going to hold up an array of values of colors that are going to start from red. So let's give this first color red, and then blue, green, purple, and black. So blue, green, purple, and black. All right, so these are our colors. Now after this, let's create a return statement, and inside this return we're going to have a div, and inside that div we'll be mapping the color buttons. So let's create a div, and this div is going to have no class name. So let's just create a simple div, and inside this div we'll be mapping each and every color value. So let's map this color value, colors.map. and this is going to take up color as well as the index. So color as well as the index. Alright, so inside this what we're going to have is a button, and this button is going to have an on click property which will supply to it in short in. So this is an on click property which will give it, but for the moment let's just give this a value, and this value is nothing but the color that we are passing via props. And after this value what we're going to have a class name. Now this is going to be a template string that is going to define the class name of that particular color button. So it is going to have a class name. Now this class name is going to be a template string, so let's make it one. Now to make it a template string, give it backticks. Now the class name is going to be btn as well as btn hyphen color, so a dollar and color. As you might see that inside of your app.css there are different css for different colors. That means there are going to be different css color applied to different colors. So as you might see, if I just scroll down, so button red, button blue, and button active, so these respective color properties are going to be applied to them as the class name changes. So that's why we're using template string. So button color as well as after this another dollar sign, and inside this what you're going to have is if color if the color of our uh, button is double equals to bg color, then we want to set it as button active. If this is the case, then you want to set the class name as button active, and if this is not the case, then you want to just return null. Now let me get rid of this on click. I'll be giving it an on click property when I'm going to make a function for this. All right, now let's close this button as well. This is going to be self-closing button. So alright, this is a button that we are giving inside of our color button component. Now this also is supposed to have a key, because otherwise React is going to yell to us that each and every mapped component should have a key. So this key is going to be nothing but the IDX or the index. Alright, so now we are all good. Now let's create a function that's going to be handling the on clicks. So let's create a const, and this is going to be nothing but handle click. Alright, so this is handle click. This is going to take up an event, and once this event has been received, then what do we want is that we want to set the bg color. So set bg color, and this is going to be e.target.value. Alright, now let's apply this handle click inside of our button. So give this an on click, and this on click is going to be handle click. Alright, now everything is in its place, but we need to export this function. So let's export default a color button. So we have successfully created our third component, or the color button component. Now let's close this and move into other component. So now we are done with our color button as well as our note input. Now let's move into our search component and we'll be configuring it. So search component is supposed to have the capability to search for the text or search for the notes that are already in the store. So that's what you're going to do. So the first thing that we're going to do is we'll be importing use dispatch and use selector as we did in the node input to get an access to the state or the store. So the first step is to import our use selector as well as use dispatch. So why don't we just copy this and paste it over there? So we would just copy this and paste it over here. Now apart from this, we'll also be needing an action, and likewise in the notes input we had this action known as add note, as you might remember that we had two actions inside of our note slice. One was to add note, another was to set or search for text. So here is a other action that we'll be importing. So that's the note slice dot action. So let's import it inside of our color button, and this time it's going to be set search text. So we are going to import, and this is coming from our components or from our source directory inside the Redux directory and notes. So let's get this. The action that we're getting is our set search text. So set search text. All right, so we are having those particular inputs that we need inside of our application. Now we are already having a color button constant. All right, so these are supposed to be inside of our uh, search, not inside this. So let's just cut them from here. So cut them, and you need to import these inside of your search text. So search them over here. All right, now paste them. Okay. Now after this, we're going to create a const dispatch as we did in the notes input. So let's create a const dispatch, and this is going to be equal to use dispatch. All right, now after this, we're going to create a search value that's going to get the data from state, that what's the search query string. So const search a value, and this is going to be equal to use selector, and inside this we're going to pass in with state. So state dot search text. All right, now we'll be creating up a handle change method so that we can change the values from our input field. So let's create a handle change. This is going to take up an event, and const text e dot target dot value. Now after this, let's dispatch our action. So dispatch, and you are dispatching set search text, and inside this we have to provide it with the text that need to be searched inside of a store. So the text that needs to be searched is the text. Okay, so now we are all good. Now we need to add certain properties inside of our input which we left earlier. So that's what we're going to do. At first we'll be adding a value property to it. So give it a value. This is going to be equal to none other than our search value. So this is going to be equal to search value. Now after this, we're also going to give it an on change, and it already has a type text and a placeholder as well as a class name. So it doesn't have a placeholder, so let's give this a placeholder that's going to be equal to search. And after this placeholder, we'll also give it on change. So let's give it this an on change as well. Now this on change is going to be equal to handle change text. So let's put it equal to handle change. All right, so now our search component is also complete. We have successfully configured it. Now let's move to our next component. So now we'll be creating one more component, and that is going to be note item component that's going to display individual notes. And for that purpose, what we're going to do is that we'll be creating one more component inside of a component directory, and the name is going to be note input or note item. So note, all right, it's on caps lock. So note item dot .jsx. All right. Now let's head to our node, or I mean to say content.jsx, and start to configure it. Now the first thing that we're going to do inside of our content .jsx is that we'll be importing React from React, which we already have done, and we'll be importing the note item that we just created, as well as the use selector from our React-Redux. So let's import our note item, and this is coming from our same directory. So note item. All right. Also, we need to import the use selector from our React-Redux. So let's import our use selector as well. This is coming from our React-Redux module. So React Redux. All right. So now let's start creating our content. So the first thing that we're going to do is that we'll be getting all the data from our state into our items. So we'll be creating a let. This is all function scope. So let items. This is going to be equal to use selector. All right. So we are getting data from our state. All right, now after this, what we're going to do is that we'll be filtering these items. So let's create a let filtered nodes. So right after this, let's create a let this is going to be equal to items, and this again is going to be having a const. So now we'll be filtering those particular text, but before we do that, we need to get the search text. So let's create a const, and this is going to fetch the search text query. So search text, this is going to come from our state. So use selector, and this time from the state we are getting a search text. So state dot search text. All right, so now inside of our items we are having all those items from our state, all I mean to say all those nodes, and inside of our search text we are having all the search text that the user wants to search for inside of our content folder. Now let's head down over here, and what we're going to do is that we are going to search that if what happens is that if the search text and double ampersand search text is not equal to an empty string, then you want to filter them. That means if both of them are true. So if search text and double ampersand if search text is true and search text is not equals to an empty string, is not equals to an so if someone has searched something and that is not an empty string, then what do we want is that then you want to get a filtered nodes, and this is going to be equal to filter nodes dot filter. Will be applying the filter function. All right, so now inside this filter we'll be taking up an individual node every time, and all right, and we'll be taking up an individual node every time, and what we're going to do is that we are going to convert it to lowercase at first. So note dot note to lowercase, and once it has been lowercase, then we want to check whether it includes the search text or not. So if it includes the search text, that also is supposed to be going to lowercase, then return it. All right, so this is going to be stored inside of our filtered nodes, and after this what we're going to do, if this is not the case, then we have to come out of this particular if, and if this is not the case, then the filtered nodes is going to be nothing, but the items. Alright, so now this is where the filtration part is done. Now we'll be passing the filtered nodes, which either is the filtered node which our user wants to see, or the entire sets of nodes that we are getting from our data. Then we want to pass this particular data into our node input. So let's call in our node input now. Node item. Alright, and we'll be passing this particular data. So let's create a prop that's going to be items, and this is going to be equal to filtered nodes, and we'll also be passing the focus property. So let's give this a focus, and this is going to be equal to items dot length greater than 0. Now let's close this nodes input. Alright, so now we have created our content. Now let's move to our node item and start to configure it. So now we'll be creating a functional component. So let's first import React from React. And after this, what we're going to do is that we'll be creating a constant with the name node item. So const node item, and this is going to take up props which are going to destructure that are namely our items as well as focus. All right. Now inside this, let's return. And inside this return, we're going to create a div with the class name node container. So let's create a div with the class name node container. And inside this node container, we're going to have if items dot length is greater than 0. If this is the case, then what do we want is that then we want to map those particular items. So items dot map, and each time we're going to take up a single item. And we'll be returning a div with the class name node item. So give this a class name that's going to be equal to node item, as well as a style. So give this a style as well. So to give it an inline styling, just create up two sets of curly braces. Inside this, give this those styling properties, that is background color, that is going to be equal to what's the color of the item. So item.bg color that we are passing. Alright, so now after this, it is also going to have a key property. So that's going to be equal to item.id. Now let's close this div. And inside this div, what you're going to have is the item node. Alright, so now after this, if that means what if this condition is false? So then what do we want is that if this is not the case, then the else part is going to state that then we need to focus, and this is if this is true, then double ampersand, we want to render the div with the class name node not found. And the text is also going to be the same, that says that note not found. That means if a user is searching for a note that doesn't exist in the store. All right, so now we are all good. Now let's just export this. Now let's see our application, how it's working. So now this is the application that we have created. If I'd like to add certain note, for example, buy the groceries, or perhaps a particular note, for example, buy the groceries. Alright, and if I add this, you might see that, yeah, it's in red. Now if I decide to change this one, that is, I want it to be of blue color, and I just make sure that I make an entry such as go to this place. Alright, now if I hit enter, you might see that it's in blue, and similarly it's going to be for green and pink and black. Now if I'd like to search one particular text, I could do so by running by text. Alright, you might see that it's right over here. So we have successfully created our application.